A bit more. My husband's passion could always make me go insane. We used to spend a lot of sleepless evenings together, choosing to stay up late together. We struggled to get ready for work the following morning. God, I longed for those days. After numerous doctor visits, tests, and attempts at every home treatment known to man, this had been going on for a few years, and the only thing that had changed was our financial account. It was expensive to be informed that medicine was unable to identify the issue and was unsure of how to proceed. Jody was never one to shy away from a challenge. I recall what he said to us on that final visit, that there was no hope. Well, Laura, he murmured, embracing me tightly, there are other ways to do a task. If women can fulfill their needs without the assistance of a man, then I can too. This led to a thorough investigation on the correct manner to perform cunnilingus. I have to admit, between the two of us, me telling him what felt good while he tried out the various techniques recommended by the tapes we watched, he got pretty good at making me have a good time. I had some experience in college, and my boyfriend back then was fine with me warming up with his tongue, as he put it. He did a good job, but he couldn't hold a light for the Jody of today. This was the same Jody who always said real men don't dine at the Y, but I'm here to tell you that the Jody of today could make a woman have fun without any assistance. What am I complaining about then? Sometimes a woman has a deep-seated itch that needs to be scratched, and nothing but a good stiff man can do the job. One drawback of our cunnilingus study videos was that, for the first time, I saw men with much larger than Jody's 6 inches. 6 inches was pretty much all I'd ever encountered in my single days, but on these videos, I saw men sporting what must have been at least 6 feet tall. That night, however, ended much like many others. Jody reminded me the following morning while I was preparing our breakfast of bacon and eggs, don't forget, our neighbor Ted is taking me fishing this morning, and you promised his wife Sandy you would soak up some sun today. Well, after last night's frustrations, I had to admit it felt good. As I puttered around cleaning up the breakfast mess and waiting for Sandy, my hand kept drifting to my crotch. Damn, Laura, I thought, you're rubbing yourself like a man. Well, we had become quite close to our next-door neighbors since we moved here 3 months ago. You could even say Sandy had taken the place of the sister I'd left behind when we moved to Garden City. It was just about to feel good, really, very nice, when there was a rap on the door. I sat on the couch and let my fingers do the walking, as Ma Belle liked to advertise. The small blonde cyclone from next door blasted into the room, hurling her bundle of beach gear onto the sofa. I barely had time to leap up and arrange my clothes. We don't stand on formality down here, she said. If the door isn't locked or the place isn't rocking, we assume you're accepting guests. I'll be with you shortly. I had just slipped into the top and was about to step into the bottoms when I heard the bedroom door open. Make yourself at home, I said as I hurried into the bedroom to change into my swimsuit, a yellow two-piece that was not quite skimpy enough to qualify as a bikini but small enough to showcase my mature assets to their best advantage. Oh no, Laura, you sure it'll cover that full bush you're sporting? That suit is going to have every man on the beach hitting on you today, she said, stepping closer and then grabbing my shoulder to push me to half-turn. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror and felt so embarrassed that I was hardly sure how to react. As a 45-year-old granny, I simply wasn't used to having women, even friends, barging into my bedroom while I'm naked from the waist down. To be honest, part of my hesitation was probably because I hadn't given the hair problem much thought before. My thick bush formed a hairy triangle, a little unkempt perhaps, but just the way Jody loved it. It had been a while since I'd clipped things up down there. I guess we'll just have to check. I pushed the bottoms up, looked in the mirror, tucked any loose hairs inside, and then turned to scrutinize. Oddly enough, I was starting to feel at ease with Sandy. Sandy said, "Good enough." She supported my cover-up as I put it on, and as she did, her hands lightly touched my shoulders, resembling a man's. I was curious about that touch, but I quickly brushed it off as my imagination because, in my world, men and women were male and female, respectively. Switch hitters, as Jody called them, were not allowed when we saw girls in the movies assume both genders. We headed to the water, Sandy pointing me in the direction of the closest parking space to the best spot on the beach, and in less than 15 minutes we had our spot selected, and I was reaching for our tent. All of our beach gear was thrown on the back of our gator, and in the front seat were what Sandy called the 2 best-looking women on Garden City. "There's no need to do all that," Sandy murmured. "Hold your horses. Just what do you suggest we do? Spend the day in the sun?" "I burned too easy for that," Sandy said. "You'll see," and began fumbling with the tent as though she was having problems unpacking it from its carrier bag. "Can we help you ladies?" Sandy asked as she backed aside, seeing how smoothly the 2 men, who couldn't have been older than 20, took over the task as if by magic. Sandy and I got in the tent and began putting on suntan lotion as soon as the towels were spread. The guys got it exactly right. The other young man, Chuck, was kneeling next to her, making sure her feet wouldn't burn, while she lay flat on her stomach, stretched out like a toy doll. My guy Red continued slathering lotion all over my back because I didn't object. He raised the strap just far enough to slide beneath it and then down to just over my suit's waistband. He appeared unclear of what to do next at this point, so he applied one more application. God, oh God, I pondered. Chuck had had a nice time, and there was nothing to be embarrassed of, as far as I could tell, but as I shifted into position, I noticed Red's bathing suit. He appeared to be concealing a 16-ounce beer can. My eyes wouldn't go away. God, imagine how that would hurt to have that thing sticking out of me. As his fingers started to creep up my leg, I urged the quiet voice in the back of my mind to stop telling me that I was a grandmother and that the child beside me might be my son. Red muttered, "Don't forget, you have to say when," and toyed for a little longer than was necessary with his hand on the gusset of my suit. When I realized that I was breathing too hard and that Red's breathing sounded different, I finally managed to stutter, but not before my body betrayed me by lifting my hips and pushing back against his hand. Could a man like that possibly be interested in an old woman like me? My mind wandered to places I wasn't quite ready to go, and then I realized that I was actually getting moist at his touch. "Now for your front," he said as he assisted me in rolling onto my back. I closed my eyes and just went with the flow for a little while, bringing me out of my dream world. For a brief moment, I had no idea what to do. I followed his urging, my hormones raging. "No." I sat up and pushed his hand away, saying, "I can't, it's not right, I'm a married woman." It was then that I realized Sandy and Chuck had stopped what they were doing and were observing us. I wasn't sure how long they had been doing this, but I'm sure my face became crimson. The only thing Red said out loud was, that saying when, backing away and putting both hands in the air in a mock surrender. "I promised to only go as far as you allowed, so I'm quitting." I could tell he truly didn't want to leave by the look on his face when he got up. Apparently Sandy noticed this too. "Oh my God." Leaping to her feet, she exclaimed, "Guys, don't be too obvious. Just check about 200 yards behind you. See those two thugs heading in this direction? These are the men who my spouse uses to monitor me." She handed him a bottle and said, "You might want to act like you're thanking us for this bottle of water and don't be anywhere around when they get here." "Why did you say something like that?" Red had mentioned he'd like to meet together another day, so I inquired as we watched the kind young men quickly go. "Red was going to ask for more than you were willing to provide. At the time, it seemed wise to scare them away." "Sandy, you're right." I realized I had a lot to thank Sandy for. I had been on the verge of allowing another man's hand where only Jody's had been since we got married. What was wrong with me? Her words brought the nagging doubt that I could have stopped Red if he had insisted, crashing to the forefront of my mind. After cooling off in the water and drying off with towels, we tried to read our books. I knew Sandy's was a mystery, but I had picked a spicy romance, one of those where the lead character has her legs outstretched by the end of the first chapter. Whoa, was that a bad decision? I finally put the book down too, as Sandy appeared to be staring at me more than the page. "What? Why do you have that kind of stare at me? It's really none of my business. Don't give that bull to me. I mean, aren't we friends? Say something if you have something to say." Sandy dropped all pretense of reading and sat so that we were staring at each other as we spoke. "Look, Laura," she started, "it's very clear you're not the same type woman I am. Okay, I'll say it, but there's no way to sugarcoat the questions. I'll be honest, if I had been by myself earlier, Charles and I would have been stomping all over one of these dunes right now." She hesitated and took a sip of water. "Can you honestly say the same? I would have been able to go home tonight, pull Ted to the bed and give him the screwing of his life, without giving Charles a second thought. Of course not. I've never been unfaithful to Jody, and if you hadn't stopped me just now, I don't know what I'd have done. Probably let Red do what he wanted to, if he pushed it, and then I'd have been so eaten up with guilt I'd have confessed everything to Jody. Honey, please don't do that. We seldom take such extreme measures. That will only lead to additional issues." I guess it must have shown because even after I agreed, I still couldn't seem to get my troubles out of my head. "There's something you're not telling me, Laura. You're poised to blow out, as everybody can see. If you don't get rid of what's bothering you, you'll lose it and hurt Jody as well." That was it. I knew she was right, and for some reason, confiding in her was the best course of action. I read through the entire story, starting at the beginning, when Jody was first starting to struggle with maintaining her energy, and her worried expression changed to one of excitement when I reached the part about how skilled Jody had become at thrilling me. Isn't that crazy? You can't understand how much I miss a good, hard hammering every now and then, even if getting off like that is a good thing. Sandy grinned broadly and said, "Your problems are over, girl. All we need to do is persuade Jody to accept the treatment, which I don't think will be particularly challenging. As I mentioned, we made every effort. Nothing is beneficial. Simply pay attention to Aunt Sandy and maintain an open mind." Have you ever heard of the Silver Fox Club? I practically remembered every detail of that night. Isn't that the place you and Ted took us the first time we went out together? The place with the great band. Jody and I had engaged in more dancing than we had for a long time, and to top off an incredible evening, Jody continued to dance until I felt satisfied. Right, the Silver Fox Club is the name of the night spot we visited. 6 nights a week it serves the public and makes loads of money for its owner, but it's the 7th night that is the answer to your problems. Sandy clarified what the Silver Fox Club actually was because I'm sure I looked pretty bewildered, and I was. A bunch of senior couples who desired some physical spice in their lives were present. They began referring to themselves as the Silver Fox Club, and the owner changed the name of his company to the Silver Fox Club after they worked out a deal for the club to serve as their exclusive gathering spot every Tuesday. The sign read "Private Meeting every Tuesday." The band was substituted with a DJ, and just the bare minimum of employees worked. Every Tuesday at 6 o'clock, cars would start pulling into the lot. Occasionally there would be as few as 10, occasionally as many as 25, but never more than 25 because it was the upper limit of club membership. The light meal was waiting for members inside, and the bar and dancing were both open. The dues take care of the meal, the owner provides the music, but anyone who drinks pays for the booze, Sandy said. I don't see how this can help my physical problems. Sandy laughed and shook her head, saying, Laura, you are something else. How can anyone reach your age and be so naive? Let me explain exactly what happens once you enter the club. The men place their name on a two-piece placard. One piece goes in a box, the other is placed on a table to mark where they are sitting for the night. Promptly at 6:30 the front doors are locked. The ladies pull a name from the box and locate the man it belongs to. He's her date for the night. You mean the woman has to, do the man she pulls, no matter what. I was at a loss for words. Let's say the man is a complete jerk. They can spend the entire evening at the club, they can watch a movie or one of the shows in North Myrtle, or they can do anything else they want to do. Personally, I find that taking a moonlit stroll on the beach before going to bed is very calming. Of course not. The couple must eat together and of course civility is a requirement. But that's the only thing that must take place. It is up to them what they do, but he has to take the woman home and leave her place before 2 in the morning. He can't naturally return home before 2:15, which is to prevent him from bumping into his wife's date. It seemed like forever before Sandy spoke again. Then, to my surprise, she said, Laura, Ted and I have been authorized to invite you and Jody to join the Silver Foxes. I couldn't say anything at all now. Yes, I could see how a plan like this might benefit me. I could have the deep loving activity I so desperately needed at least once a week. I questioned, but what about Jody? How does he fit in? Any woman who draws him is bound to be disappointed. Sandy laughed again. Laura, you're too much. You don't understand that Jody will be the group's most popular man. I'm not sure, I responded, reluctant to acknowledge that the concept appealed to me. However, even if I agreed, how would we ever convince Jody to follow through? Her cell phone rang as soon as I finished speaking. She listened for a few drawn-out minutes before turning to smile at me. No issues. Ted has been explaining things to Jody during our conversation. Ted states that Jody is undoubtedly intrigued. That was stunning news, and I'm pretty sure Jody would never have thought of it. Well, it seems like the initiative is now in my hands, isn't it? I need to give it some thought. Yes, Sandy replied. The remainder of the day went by almost too quickly, with all of my thoughts focused on Sandy's offer and what I was going to tell Jody when he got home. Did I want to do it? Well, sort of. Lately, every night as I lay in bed, all I could think about was how great it would feel to have a man push me to the limit. This seemed like my chance to truly have mind-blowing bonding again, with Jody's permission. How could I top that? I just didn't know whether ladies like me really did things like that. I mean, I stopped red when he touched me like that, so could I really go through with it? Would I mess everything up by backing out halfway through the evening? Sandy say anything to you about the Silver Fox Club? Jody saved me the shame of having to broach the subject. We didn't discuss the Silver Foxes until we sat down to a lunch of fried fish and grits. I started to blush, she mentioned it. What do you think of the idea? Well, Laura, it sounds like a chance for you to experience what you want, and if Ted knows what he's talking about, it might be a chance for me to meet women who appreciate what my skills down in the V. He believed that I didn't appreciate what he had done for me, but oh honey, it's not like that at all. Oh my lord, now I really did feel like a dog. My only concern is that we might not be able to handle the changes this will bring to our lives. Blowing our stack once in a while is one thing, but cheating on a regular basis will destroy our marriage. Baby doll, I'm not against it. In fact, based on Jody's report, it sounds like I might make out pretty good in this deal. I gave what he said some thought, and he was correct. Then I recalled Sandy telling me it was something that happened once a week, but even so, I just don't know. Do you really think you could let another man have you, Laura? I answered slowly. It depends on who the guy is, but Sandy says we only go as far as we want. Some couples leave the club and just do whatever until time to go home. So, yeah, I think I can handle it, but I'd like to think about it for a while. Jody wrapped me in his arms and rubbed his flaccid member against my pelvis. Me too, but the decision is up to you. I have to admit, I'm less than enthusiastic about another guy getting between your legs, but by the same token, having a woman who really likes my talent does appeal to me. As we clung to each other and kissed for what felt like an eternity, his tenderness kept bringing up the issue. He responded, okay, baby, it's your call. Let me know about your decision, and I'll give them our answer as we parted ways. I actually did think about it for more than 2 months, when I say that. Sandy and I kept hanging out and visiting the beach to get our tans during that period. Sandy persisted in trying to persuade me that her idea was the only way to solve our issue at that period as well. While we were lounging on our beach towels, a well-groomed guy would walk by. Sandy never shied away from telling me exactly what that piece of flesh was capable of doing to me. Red even volunteered to apply my lotion when he came over one morning to save me from being burned. I have to admit, it was tempting to imagine his hands on my body, but I forced myself to resist. Jody would have to be involved in whatever I did, or at least it would have to be done using his expertise, and while he was able to have fun too. At last, following a particularly unpleasant confrontation with Jody, I reached a breaking point one evening. "Honey," I replied, "you know I love you, but I just can't take this any longer. I must have a good old-fashioned good time. I think it's time to call Sandy." He took up the phone and made a call. "Sandy, Jody here. We're in. If you can, please get things started to get us to the next meeting." That was Thursday night. I was a walking wreck the rest of the week. Then came the big day. There were only a half a dozen cars in the parking lot when Jody eased our Outback alongside a red SUV. He came around to open my door, and if he hadn't been there to support me, I swear my legs would have fallen off the moment my feet touched the ground. Whispering, "Easy, baby," he bit my ear. "You're not excited, are you?" I didn't bother to answer, mostly because I wasn't sure my mouth could make words, but I did hold on to his arm until we got inside the club, and I hardly had time to feel nervous after that. Sandy was waiting for us when we walked in, and she took over right away, making sure Jody signed in correctly and even showing him to Ted's seat. After we'd left Jody and Ted, she whispered to me, "That way he'll have a little moral support when he watches you claim your seat with another man. It can be quite trying for a man to see his wife coupling with another for the first time." I was so nervous that I don't think I remembered a single name during the next 15 minutes that Sandy spent introducing me to the other women. When the timer finally went off, the club president blew a whistle, the staff locked the front doors, and we women lined up to draw a name from the box. I took a deep breath, reached in, and fumbled around a bit before grasping a card. I stepped away before I looked to see which name I'd drawn. I must have called out, "Mike Stanford," because Sandy, who was nearby but unable to read my ticket, approached. "He's called Big Mike," she murmured in my ear. "I think he'll surpass your expectations, but he's not a freak." She led the way to a corner table for two where a huge man sat and said, "Let me lead you to his table." "Hold on. Tell me your name," I said. "Don't get upset, now." She spoke the name of Jody. "Just look at it like this. I'll make sure Jody's first time as a silver fox is one he'll never forget." I said, "Be sure you do," and walked up to my evening companion. "Mr. Stanford, I'm Laura, and it appears that I'm your evening date." He stood as I got closer. "Call me Mike, Laura, that's what everyone else does." A full head of snow-white hair made him look distinguished, and when he kissed my hand and said, "I look forward to this evening, Laura," then held my chair until I was seated, I felt a tingle run down my body. Now here is a man who knows how to treat a woman, I thought. He must have stood at least 6'3" with the body of a man who'd spent his life in the construction industry. My guess is, he must weigh over 200 and it didn't look like there was an ounce of fat on his entire body. Mike, I must say, confirmed my prediction. He struck up a conversation as soon as we sat down, never seemed to run out of things to say, and he wasn't one of these people who hogs the conversation. Either, somehow he led me right into the middle of whatever topic at hand, and I think I talked about more topics than I've ever known anything about in my life. Since they left so quickly, I figured Sandy would rather play than eat, and if I knew my Jody, that would be right up his alley. He'd want to eat something all right, but it wouldn't be very filling. I also didn't miss the little kiss Sandy blew my way. At first, I was worried about Jody, and I must admit to a brief moment of jealousy. I found that I could relax a little more after Jody and Sandy left. Mike and I went to the buffet line, and Mike bought a bottle of wine, which helped to ease my nerves. After our second glass, Mike led me to the dance floor, and he was a wonderful dancer and a perfect gentleman. We returned to our table, and Mike poured another glass, and he kept telling me how beautiful I was, and he even managed to rub the back of his hand over my cheeks and up my neck to gently tug on my earlobe. When his fingers touched my earlobe and the area just behind, I shivered, as if he were pulling on a string that ran from my ear to my vulva. When he reached to top it off, I drew my glass back, saying, "I better not. I'm not much of a drinker." We carried on drinking and discussing our all-time favorite love films. "I don't think anyone will ever top Love Story," he said. I replied, "Well, at least finish what you have." As we were talking about our favorite scenes, it occurred to me that I was approaching the feel-good stage of life, the one where I normally say and do dumb things. I remarked, "They're playing our song again," as soon as the Tennessee Waltz started. I dragged him to the ground and quickly lost myself in his embrace. I rested my head on his shoulder and placed my arms around his neck as he slid me around the floor. His body pressed into mine, and I didn't resist, but I also didn't retreat. His hand, firmly planted on my waist at the beginning of the dance, sank till it stopped on my butt. Mike drew me in closer as its mate soon joined it. My body tingled as his big shaft pressed hard against my pubic area. When it came time to actually dance, we gave up and just shuffled our feet while keeping our bodies together. He held me hard against his manhood and went on to explore my mouth with his tongue. I was a contradiction in myself. I enjoyed the sensation of the hard skin on my innermost being. It wasn't a monster, probably around the same as Jody's from back in the day, but it appeared big, very big, because it had been so long since Jody's could do anything but get almost hard enough. What mattered most was that it stayed firm the entire time. I didn't want to carry this thing any farther, even though I wanted more. Nevertheless, in spite of every nerve in my body telling me I was doing something wrong, those same nerves murmured, "Once wouldn't hurt, would it?" The next instant, Mike nibbled on my earlobe and said, "Let's get out of here and go over to your place." I can't, was my final stumble. I've never done anything like this before. Sure, I understand. Believe me, I wouldn't want you to do anything you don't want to do. We can still spend some time together tonight. To tell the truth, I enjoyed just talking to you. Aside from Jody, of course, Mike was the most empathetic man I believe I have ever encountered. I still thought Jody was the best. You don't have anything against taking the rest of the wine and a couple glasses out on the beach, do you? It's usually beautiful this time of night. I enjoyed sprawling out on the sand and watching the moonbeams dance across the sea, so I thought that was a great idea. That's how we ended up sitting on a blanket at the water's edge while Mike poured us another glass of wine. We sipped our wine and struck up a conversation about anything and everything that crossed our minds. I realized that we were discussing our first loves as I woke up. Mike shared with us his initial clumsy attempts at genuinely completing the task. He admitted, "I was really embarrassed. Man, that back seat in Dad's old Lincoln felt almost like a bed, and we were hot and ready in there." I noticed that I was starting to feel warm and fuzzy in my under area, so I didn't mind when Mike bent down to give me a forehead kiss. My muscles seemed as like they were grabbing and releasing his spitting shaft until we both fell to the ground, exhausted. As soon as our strength returned, Mike looked at his watch, which had a little button you could press to see the time in the dark. "Come on," he murmured, standing up and dragging me along. "We'd better get you home and rinse off in the ocean. We would prefer not to have you skip your initial curfew." The sandy towel worked okay once we shook off as much sand as possible, but I was relieved to be back in my house in time to take a quick shower before Jody entered through the front door. I had completely forgotten about the rule that stated Mike had to be gone before Jody returned. He came through the door grinning from ear to ear, and when he kissed me, I could still smell the combination of Sandy's perfume and bonding. I had met him in the nice gown I owned, which was so sheer he would have been able to clearly see I had nothing on beneath. "Baby, are you having fun?" She wasn't as good as you, but she was still very nice and, as I mentioned earlier, very different. "It was good, honey," he said. "How did your evening go?" I decided not to lie, just not to go into too much detail. Full disclosure could come later, when we both got acclimated to the concept. I love Jody, but, you know, a man's ego is a delicate thing. Could he survive being told in detail how it really was? To be really honest, even though tonight was amazing, I wouldn't exchange you for him. To put it simply, tonight made me appreciate what we have. I get what you mean, once a week is sufficient, but I wouldn't want to stop doing this. The remaining 6 days are ours to put what we've learned into practice with one another. My comment: I know a woman with 2 kids and with 2 grandkids and over 60 wanted to cheat. She confessed she cheated on her husband a lot earlier as well. The cheating adventure is smaller danger and fewer wife do over 50, but to say there is not is a mistake.